Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So, today I'm going to start with a personal story. My dad's been my hero for forever, really. Growing up as a kid, my dad never really prioritized his sleep and worked right through the night. Nobody could outwork him. He worked 7 days a week. It wasn't until I was in the third grade, I still remember to this day, he looked at me and he said to my mother, "When did he grow up?" And then after that, he started taking his weekends off. He took summers off, but he always can still worked a lot. Now he would tell everybody that he ate very well because he's always tended to have six-pack abs, arms that most people would envy, always looked very fit. But eating well is a matter of context. He would have 12 eggs in the morning, and he would consider that to be a healthy breakfast. And he would oftentimes be able to, even at 69 years old, do things that the 20-year-olds couldn't do. But he was also under a lot of stress, and that stress took a toll on him. In fact, in his final weeks of life, he said he believed it was the stress that killed him. Sadly, in February of 2023, my father passed away. It's one of the hardest moments of my life. He worked all the way until the point that he died. So health became a massive priority for me. And I could see that health, there's this old saying that Tony Robbins told me that how you do anything is how you do everything. It doesn't really matter how much money you make as a business owner, as a CEO. If you don't take care of your health, you can't enjoy any of it. So today's guest actually is one of the foremost experts in health. He's one of the top influencers in the space. He's a human performance consultant. He's a New York Times best-selling author of over 13 books. Some of the books you probably read, like Beyond Training, Boundless Fit Soul, Boundless Cookbook, Spiritual Disciplines Journal, Endure, so much more. He specializes in performance and fat loss and digestion and brain and sleep and hormone, anti-aging, parenting, relationships, tropics, all that other fun stuff. He's one of the top 100 most influential people in health and fitness. Look, guys, I can just keep going and going. I'm going to bring him onto the show. Ben Greenfield, my man, welcome to the show.
Hey, Charles. Sorry to hear about your dad. Something that's dear to my heart because I've been trying to help my father with some life threatening cancer issues. And you say all those really gracious and nice things about my knowledge of health, but I tell you what, it's the toughest thing when you know all the things, but you're trying to help a family member who's very resistant to those ideas. And so when you were talking about your father, it just made me think so much about this idea of doing podcasts like this to help get the word out to people so that they can know it for themselves. Because it's really interesting. I'll get my dad a book or have him listen to a podcast or an audio book or connect him with some physician and he'll listen to that person. But yeah, it's difficult when, I've helped so many people through cancer issues just as a consultant. I'm not a doctor, but I help people out with their health and performance, something that I got lucky early on in the day avoiding just because of my education in and understanding of circadian biology. I've certainly built my business more slowly because I sleep adequately and spend lots of time with family and take care of my health. The 12 eggs for breakfast that you mentioned. And it's very difficult to sift through the confusion in the literature. Are eggs good? Are eggs bad? Pastured hens that aren't the same as the average egg you'd buy at the grocery store. And so, it all depends on the context and what you're eating ate to a certain extent. And then the last thing you mentioned is that your dad looked fit but wasn't. That's what led me to write my first book, Beyond Training, that went into this idea of all the advice that you read in Men's Health magazine or Women's Health magazine about, working out till you're blue in the face and eating lean chicken and broccoli and rice. But
Mm.
what they don't show is all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes: your thyroid, your testosterone, your joint health, your lipid markers. I mean, heck, even the plaque in your heart. I wrote that book when I was a multi-time Ironman triathlete racing in world championships. And then I finally thought, well, gosh, this whole idea of blood and biomarker testing is becoming so available to the masses. I ought to do that on myself. And I was shocked at what I found, low thyroid and low testosterone and inflammation. And even later on, you said I looked healthy at that event in California, But even now, I'm working on melting away some plaque that accumulated in my heart because of that, that you never would have thought by looking at me, right? Like I look like I'm maybe an aerobically fit athlete. Yeah, I mean, you brought up three perfect points, right? Prioritization of sleep, understanding of what a healthy diet actually is versus what media or popular science might say, and thinking you're fit when you might be on the outside, but you aren't on the inside. These are all really important things, man.
So let me ask you, where this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast, we have a lot of CEOs and aspiring CEOs and A type personalities and people that are focused on taking their business way beyond the next level and becoming category leaders. For a lot of those people, they don't believe that spending that extra time carving it out to work out in the morning, to ensure that the diet is clean, to be properly hydrated, to have the right nutritional stack and whatnot, that really has any attributing factor to their long term success. What would you say to somebody that says, I don't have to take care of myself? I'll do that only after I make money. Do you think there's any correlation between health and success?
Man, I'd tell them they must have the genes of that like gin chugging hard Montana rancher who still lives till they're 100 years old because most people, they really can't get away with that from a longevity standpoint, nor from a mental standpoint. I think the executives' key tool in their arsenal is their brain. And if you look at things like the gut brain axis, right, how serotonin is made in the gut to stabilize your neural function, and how important neurotransmitters that spark energy and proper cognitive function and executive function, like dopamine and serotonin and GABA, these are all reliant upon a healthy gut. When you look at the ability of nutrients and compounds to be able to enter into the brain, well, there are certain things like alcohol and poor sleep, for example, that cause the blood brain barrier to become permeable. And so you wind up with toxins and metals and inflammation accumulating in neural tissue. And suddenly you're struggling for words because your sleep hygiene has suffered. Very interesting because there's a real trend right now in the industry towards discussing and treating what's called the gut brain axis and the gut
Mhm.
metabolism axis, which is very much related to the amount of stress that you're under, the amount of sleep that you get, and the way that you fuel your body. When you look at the exercise component, you could say similarly, right? For you to actually dump massive amounts of what would be considered miracle growth for the brain, like brain derived neurotrophic factor or vascular endothelial growth factor into your neural tissue, that's reliant upon things like cardiovascular exercise, weight training, or frequent visits to the sauna or the cold tub. And it's almost like a cheat code on life when your brain is actually humming away the way that it should. At the gym in the morning, I wouldn't consider it a waste for two reasons. The reasons I just mentioned about long term performance of the brain, treating it like a Ferrari. But then I also wouldn't avoid it because you can use that time and the rest of your day wisely. What I mean by that? Well, I use my time in the gym as a university. I'm listening to industry based podcasts. I'm listening to audiobooks. Sometimes it's silence and I'm taking the notes that come to me when I'm in a different physiological state. I consider that time to be highly productive, especially from a learning standpoint. I tell most of my clients the gym should be an option, right? You should have a kettlebell on the floor of your office, a pull up bar in the door of the office, a walking treadmill, 60 jumping jacks or 30 push ups, and you should hack your environment. I'll be in my office for 8 hours and I'll walk out of my office, take a break around 3 or 4 p.m. and I've walked 10,000 steps and I've done 100 kettlebell swings and 100 push ups and 50 pull ups. I don't have to go to the gym that night. And one major way to start is I tell people, hey, the phone rings. If you don't have to be sitting or at your desk to take the call, slip on the shoes, go outside, walk a few laps around the house or the office, take the call, come back in. You do that like 5 or 6 times during the day during phone calls that you don't need to be tied down for. You'll automatically log like 4 to 5 thousand steps, get fresh air, get sunshine. It's just a different approach, right? So like you don't have to go to the gym.
Sure. Let's think about this, right? So, if you look at the common CEO and executive, business owner, They roll out of bed in the morning, they have a couple cups of coffee, and it seems to be a very popular trend where several people are going to take like Adderall or whatnot just to be
Sure.
able to have that extra focus and that extra productivity. So you're known as a human performance expert. How common do you see that type of situation? And what's the problem with that? And what can they do differently to be have more energy and clearer decision making processes?
Yeah, my main issue with Adderall is disrupted electrical rhythms in the heart, dopamine desensitization, meaning things that are supposed to feel good feel less and less good unless you're on it. And when you get off it, life kind of sucks and you get depressed. Poor sleep patterns and disruption of a normal human circadian rhythm. So, like early nighttime awakenings, difficulty getting to sleep at night, and overall issues with proper rest. There's an entire field called nootropics. It literally translates in Greek, I believe, to mind director, right? Nootropic. And these are compounds that you find in the plant kingdom that are synthesized naturally, like whatever, ginkgo biloba or bacopa monnieri or green tea extract or different forms that are isolated from a coffee bean.
Does kratom fit in that mix?
Kratom fits into that mix. It's a little bit more addictive than coffee and can be disruptive to the gut in a lot of people. But there's so many safer, healthier, cleaner, and even more accessible, without a prescription alternatives to Adderall that while I do not endorse Adderall, I do endorse diving into this world of nootropics or so-called smart drugs. Some of my clients get off Adderall by starting onto a safe nootropic blend. There's one called Qualia, made by a company called Neurohacker Collective. There's another one called Notable Focus. On it has one called Alpha Brain. One of my favorites is this company called Newtopia. And again, like some people might be thinking, well, Ben, you just told me to eat clean and sleep well and de-stress, and I'd have mental energy. And that's true. But now we're talking about going from good to great, right? Now we're talking about jumping into your neighborhood 5K and walking it in 40 minutes versus like running it in 18 minutes, right? So there are levels when we get into human performance. But to directly answer your Adderall question, I don't like it, but I'm certainly not against upgrading your brain.
And so when we think about some of the other, I guess, biohacking type of things, cold plunges and everything, which also seems to be a popular trend, at least on Instagram and whatnot, how much of that is actually fad versus how much of that do you believe actually makes a difference?
Well, I mean, yeah, there are certain things I would say would be considered darlings of the biohacking industry with a lot of solid peer reviewed human clinical research behind it, often double blinded, often placebo controlled. And a few of those would include, as you just noted, cryotherapy or cold therapy. It doesn't have to be a lot. We're talking like 30 to 60 seconds a day can change
Hmm.
your nervous system function and your blood sugar regulation.
Wow.
Another one would be red light therapy, the use of near infrared and far infrared and red light at specific wavelengths to trigger hormone production and recovery and collagen and elastin production, better sleep, etc. All the way up to like infrared saunas that you sweat inside. Another would be grounding or earthing, right? Going outside barefoot, laying on your back on the ground, walking on the sand on the beach, swimming in the ocean, and even doing things like I've done. Like I have a grounding mat on the floor of my office. So I'm constantly drawing in the natural anti-inflammatory compounds that the surface of the earth produces based on the negative ions it accumulates every time lightning strikes the surface of the planet and every time solar radiation bombards the surface of the planet. And again, like if you go to PubMed and do a little finger searching, you can see reams of evidence that it actually works. So I'm very data driven. I don't get caught up in the fads per se. Sometimes the fads are what alerts me to the existence of a certain strategy. But step two for me is go check out the research. And you'd be surprised. There's some things biohackers are doing that are unproven. There's others that you can find good research behind.
Got it. So, we talked earlier about my dad, and he had six pack abs and arms like most people would kill for, yet he was really unhealthy when it comes down to it. You don't die of cancer because you're healthy. You die of cancer because you had an unhealthy body. So, how does somebody know if they're healthy or not?
Well, number one reason you die from cancer is lack of human connectivity, which is interesting.
What
But
does that mean?
isolation, loneliness, not a lot of friends and relationships, bitterness, anger, unresolved conflict. There's a great book called, I believe it's called Anti-Cancer Living, that goes into the research behind this. Shocking how many chronic diseases are associated with loneliness and lack of human connectivity, which is why you should go out of your way to prioritize, family dinners, dates with your spouse, dinner parties, going out in the community, picking up a hobby, even though it might seem annoying, like pickleball or tennis or golfing. Like, I'm prone because I love my job to just work all day, but I force myself to do all those things because I know that is good for me. So, back to the how do you know if you're healthy? So, ideally, you start with the low hanging fruit. Let me just give you an illustration of like a crawl, walk, run strategy, right? Crawl would be you get a sleep and activity and heart rate tracker. Like I wear this ring, it's called an Aura, and you self quantify things like sleep, step count, your nervous system health, your heart rate, your respiratory rate, etc. And you pair that with a very simple and affordable and no hassle test of just the basics of what are going on in your body, with probably the easiest way to do that being just like a hair tissue mineral analysis, where you're literally just like cutting a snip of hair and sending it off to a lab and at least getting a decent
Mhm.
idea what your minerals, what your stress, what some basic blood parameters that are reflected in the hair look like. Right? That would be like the crawl strategy. Just start using a wearable and test your hair. And then like the walk strategy would be what I do with most of the people who sign up to work with me as a coach do. And for that, we do a stool test to look at parasites and yeast and fungus in the gut. We do a full blood panel to look at all the vitamins and hormones and nutrients in the blood. We do a urine panel to look at testosterone, estrogen, melatonin, cortisol, etc. Because urine is way more accurate than blood because it gives you more of a 24-hour snapshot. We do a
Okay.
salivary DNA test to see what diseases you might be predisposed towards and what type of diet would be best for you from an ancestral standpoint. We pair that with the food allergy test to look at what foods, even so called health foods, that may or may not agree with your specific constitution. And then the last one is just like a very small micronutrient test to look at little fatty acids and amino acids and things like that. So it's about 6 tests. So that would be like the walk strategy. And the run strategy would be you visit one of these fancy new clinics like Next Health or Fountain Life, and you get a full body MRI. You get a CT angiography of the heart, which, by the way, is how I found out that even though I was fit as a fiddle, I was at high risk for a widowmaker heart attack because it shows
Whoa.
where the plaque accumulates in the heart. You get you get like a flow scan score of nitric oxide production, EKG. Typically, they'll do some blood analysis and gut analysis and all the things I just mentioned also at a clinic like that. And a lot of your listeners would just be familiar with that as an executive panel screening on steroids. So there's 3 different levels. You can start basic with just wearable data and HTMA, the hair tissue analysis, which is kind of useful for just like ongoing testing at a low expense, like doing that every 4 months and watching your wearable every day. Do the walk strategy and those 6 tests I mentioned, you just do on like a yearly basis, or you sign up for, a 30 to 50K membership at one of these more fancy executive health screening centers, and you just go in on a yearly basis and you have a concierge physician, and you're actually doing the scans, and they're able to prescribe medications if those are necessary. So obviously a few different ways to do it. I should mention, by the way, that executive screening at one of these fancier clinics, that'll also include fitness parameters, right? Like
Yeah.
VO2 max, grip strength, balance, etc. So those are of course important parts of the equation as well.
And then there's our buddy Reagan Archibald over at East West as well that will also do a comprehensive screening and peptides and all that other fun stuff.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Reagan's great. I'll be there at the time of this recording in a few months in February to do a brain optimization day with Reagan, where we're going to bring a small number of people in to do a full analysis of their brain, let people try out peptides and different kind of like advanced brain nutrient protocols, and kind of feed through the fire hose as far as mental and cognitive optimization is concerned. That'll be at Reagan's clinic at East West Health. So yeah, I'm very familiar with him.
Awesome. Awesome. Very cool. So, You mentioned something about diet, and I know we're pushing up against the clock, but I do want to answer this because this, or have you address this because I know it's a popular one. On one hand, you've got people preaching veganism is the best, and there's forks over knives in the China study. On the other hand, you've got other people that are on the complete opposite that says carnivore only and eat nothing but meat, and a bunch of people in the middle. Is it possible that there's no such thing as a one size fits all diet? And if so, how do I know what diet is actually best for me?
Well, it's possible there's a no one size fits all human. So I guess so. That's like the dirty secret in the diet and nutrition industry. Based on individual biochemistry, different shapes of the stomach and the pancreas and the liver, and different vitamin D excretion rates, and different genetic pathways for all sorts of different reactions within the body, and based on whatever, whether you have your appendix or not, or whether you have your gallbladder or not, or whether you're training for an Ironman or not. Right? There's so many things that you have to consider. But first of all, everything I just said about testing gives you a great deal of insight into that, because I can sit back with a test and say, okay, so this person told me that their neighbor lost 20 pounds on a ketogenic diet, but that's going to totally screw my client because they have familial hypercholesteremia. They have an ApoE4 gene that dictates high risk of Alzheimer's in response to high intake of saturated fats. And they've got poor gallbladder production. And this person would be better suited to some semblance of like a low carb Mediterranean diet. But that's not the way you're going to eat for your whole life. You're not going to tell your friends, I found the perfect diet. So, it all depends. I guess like the closest thing to a good answer to your question, though, that's less complicated, and this might be based on human origins in the Fertile Crescent, is that when you look at epidemiological data, particularly lowered risk of heart disease, some twist on the Mediterranean diet seems to be really good and agree well with most human beings. I'm talking about the Mediterranean diet, which has like periods of time during the year where you're fasting and protein restriction, oodles of olive oil, not a ton of wheat and gluten, but a huge variety of herbs and spices and plants, a lot of fish and eggs with limited amounts of red meat. And when you step back and look at that diet, it does seem to work for a shockingly high number of people.
Got it. One of the most common things that people deal with is stress, especially entrepreneurs and CEOs. I know myself at the way I used to do it is I used to say if I just have one cocktail at the end of the night, I'll be fine. But ever since I tracked my with my Whoop, I realized that even as something as little as one cocktail, it reduced my sleep score by 20%. So I realized that wasn't going to work anymore. So simple things like ashwagandha has helped, and more recently, I've been finding kava at the end of the night has been awesome for relaxing me and allowing me to go into real deep sleep. But I'm curious, my approach between the ashwagandha and the kava, do you have something better? Would you say that my approach is not optimal, or I'm just curious
That's
before we head into the final
it's
question?
decent. I mean, so-called adaptogens, which kind of like tune up or tune down the nervous system, like ashwagandha or kava, like a lot of different mushroom extracts, like reishi or cordyceps or rhodiola. They're all going to be a little bit better for reducing stress than a pharmaceutical or alcohol or smoking a joint. But I think that at some point, and this is interesting because you look at fixing insomnia, and most of it doesn't come down to the pills you pop. It comes down to cognitive behavioral therapy and awareness and breath work and more lifestyle based strategies. And I'd say the same for stress. Like the stuff you're doing helps, but in my opinion, besides the obvious, like gratitude and relationships and
Sure.
all the things that I think people kind of already know about, I think heat, cold, and breath work are the top three strategies in my own stress control toolbox. Meaning, get an app like Other Shift or Breath
Yep.
Source and do 2 to 30 minutes of breath work a few times a week. Do some kind of cold exposure, preferably every day. Hit the sauna a few times a week. So I think heat, cold, and breath work is a good strategy. Not turning to alcohol and weed and considering adaptogens like you're doing, also a good strategy. Prayer, gratitude, relationships, human connectivity. So you kind of can stack a lot of those habits.
Got it. Now, the final big question that I'd love to ask my guests, where this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast, if there was one big tip, your best tip for our CEOs and founders who want to take their business beyond seven figures, what would that be?
Get your priorities straight, because your question might be partially interpreted as beyond seven figures is the ultimate goal. when happiness and life satisfaction, fulfillment, and freedom of time should be the ultimate goal. And I can tell you what, I'm incredibly happy and fulfilled and still run a pretty decent business. And my priorities are as follows. Number one, God in my spiritual life. Wake up, pray, gratitude practice, breath work, connection to a higher power. Number two is my spouse. Weekly one on one spouse meetings, scheduled one on one date nights. Number three is your children, connection with your children, your legacy, why you're working in the first place. Number four is your health. And finally, number five is business. Right?
Yeah.
Do not up and jump into emails. Your morning routine should include God and talking with your spouse and the kids in the living room at 7 a.m. with a little bit of meditation and more prayer. And then ducking out to get a workout in or cranking out push ups in the basement or going for a walk with a dog or whatever. And finally, once you've done all that, you open up the email inbox and you get into work. So get your priorities straight. That's my number one piece of advice.
I love that. Recently I was having a discussion with my chief of staff, and we were talking about my ultimate goal, why I'm doing all this stuff and whatnot. And there's a few other businesses that we're getting involved with. I read this quote that said, "If you love what you do, you never have to work a day in your life." And I said, I've always seen, for me, work life balance being work life integration, meaning that whether I'm working or I'm playing, either way, I'm always feeling like I'm playing, that it must give me energy. When people wake up in the morning and on Monday morning and they're already dreading their day, they're losing at life. So, what do they need to do to readjust, to your point, those priorities, to focus on more of the things that they really enjoy doing that give them that energy? That can help them win at more things. Now, Ben, you're everywhere, all over the internet. But if people want to learn more about the different things that you do and continue on this conversation, where do we send them?
I'd say my book Boundless would be a really good guide. You can find that on Amazon. And then my podcast at bengreenfieldlife.com or wherever you find podcasts would be pretty helpful for folks.
Perfect. So that's Ben Greenfield Life. Make sure you check out his podcast, grab his book, Boundless. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Remember, we're intellectual athletes over here. So the quality of your decisions oftentimes makes a direct impact into your ability to go beyond seven figures and to enjoy the life that you're created as a result of the business that you've built yourself. So, also as a reminder, for those of you who want additional tips, strategies, and information, taking your business beyond seven figures, also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gaudette with my friend Ben Greenfield, and I will see you in another episode.
Thanks, Charles.